If you ask me why I like photography, I think I'd have a fairly lengthy answer. There are so many things about this art form that interest me, so many aspects of it that I just love. Photography is inspiring and exciting. It's a skill and a craft. It's at the same time objective and subjective. It's about communication and storytelling and documentation. And whether you like it or not, it's also about gear, using it, learning about it, investing in it, figuring out what works for you, and going with it. One thing that comes up a lot when I talk to new photographers and even professionals is the idea of primes versus zooms. Which one is better? Where should I invest? What am I missing out on if I don't use one or the other? Hi everybody, for those of you who are new here, my name is Zach. I'm a photographer and arts administrator based in Santa Barbara, California. And the first prime lens that I ever used was a Canon 40mm f2.8 pancake lens that I got from Best Buy for like $100. It was the first lens that I really started shooting my professional work on when I started my career. And that lens taught me about what a prime lens can do for you, and it really shaped the way that I shoot. So what's so special about it? Let's assume that if you're watching this video, you're new to photography and you might be trying to decide where to start. Or maybe you're not new to photography, but you're new to either zoom lenses or prime lenses and you're trying to decide if you've been missing out on one or the other. Let's start at the beginning. So lenses are essentially pieces of glass that focus light. They attach to a camera by a particular lens mount, and these vary from camera system to camera system. All lenses come in different focal lengths. It's how wide or how tight a particular lens is. So does it capture a wide field of view, or is it fairly zoomed in? So on the widest end, we have lenses like the 14mm, the 16mm, and then we get to something more standard like the 24, the 28mm. Then we get to the classic 35mm, which is a very versatile and useful focal length. We move on to my favorite focal length, the 50mm, focal lengths like the 85mm, which is a classic portrait focal length, and then focal lengths like the 70 to 200 focal range, which we have zooms and primes in there, and then anything above 200mm is sort of specialized for like wildlife photography or sports photography, and you probably won't need any of those lenses, nor would you want to spend the money or carry them around. So we have this range of focal lengths from really wide to pretty tight. And within that range, we have zoom lenses and prime lenses. Now, prime lenses are fixed. They're one focal length within that range of available focal lengths. So the 35mm, for example, that's it. It's just a 35mm. It doesn't zoom in. So in order to zoom into your subject, you have to just move closer to them because there's no other way to do it. Now, zoom lenses are variable focal length lenses. So for example, the 24 to 70 is a popular lens because it touches on a lot of wide focal lengths, and then you get to almost a telephoto length at the 70mm. So it's a really versatile lens, and you get all of these focal lengths in one zoom lens, the 24 to 70. This gives you the flexibility to be able to shoot at multiple focal lengths with just one lens, so you don't have to change your lens in order to change your focal length. So if you're shooting with a wide angle at a 24, you don't have to change to, a 50mm. You can just turn the barrel of the lens and then you get to 50mm. So it's more convenient in that way. I would predict that most new photographers are familiar with zoom lenses as they're commonly included in camera kits, right? It's usually the kit lens is a zoom lens because it's sometimes considered more convenient, right? To have a zoom lens where you don't have to have multiple lenses to have multiple focal lengths. So pros and cons of each. As we just discussed, zoom lenses are more convenient in that you can zoom in and out of a scene with just one lens without having to change lenses. Really convenient. Zooms can also be particularly useful for specific kinds of work. For example, in my career, I shoot a lot of stage work for performing arts organizations, and in certain situations, I have to stand in one spot at the back of the theater and capture the performance. And it would be really hard to do this with just prime lenses in some circumstances. If I'm not allowed to move around the theater, having a variable focal length lens and a zoom lens is hugely convenient, especially for something that is high action on stage where scenes are changing quickly. You want to be able to get your wide shots, to get your tight shots without having to fumble around in the dark at the back of the theater with prime lenses. It just makes more sense in that situation to be using a zoom lens. And zoom lenses can help you capture images that you might not otherwise be able to capture in the moment if you need to shift focal lengths in order to achieve a certain image, right? So if you're shooting pretty tight and then something happens and you need a wide angle, in that moment, you can just turn the lens and capture the wide angle. Whereas if you were shooting with a tight prime lens, you wouldn't be able to do that and you would probably miss your shot. But zoom lenses are traditionally thought of as being bigger and bulkier than prime lenses. They're also known to be less bright, so they don't have as wide of an aperture. They don't let in as much light as prime lenses can. And zoom lenses are often thought of as being less sharp than prime lenses, although a lot of that is changing as we move into the next generation of camera systems in the mirrorless lineup of cameras, but that's just the general thought about zooms versus primes right now. Take it or leave it. Now, as I mentioned earlier, primes encourage you to move around your space, explore, to see your scene from different angles and different points of view, because you have to move around in order to get closer or further from your scene. It just encourages you to move when you're using a prime lens. What I love about prime lenses is that they really teach you exactly what each focal length looks like. And this is sometimes hard to understand if you're shooting with a zoom lens. A 35mm lens renders images quite differently from a 50mm, and a 50mm renders images quite differently from an 85mm. And understanding this can help us as photographers make informed artistic decisions about our work. Learning photography from a prime lens can be really valuable in that sense that it teaches you what different focal lengths can do for you, and that helps you make more informed decisions. But that being said, sometimes primes can feel limiting because you are stuck with one focal length, and different photographers will have different preferences as far as whether or not they like using primes. So how do we decide? Well, I can only offer my informed opinion here. Notice I use the word opinion. I hesitate to even call it advice, but this is how I see it. My philosophy is that learning photography with a prime lens will be more enjoyable and will teach you more than learning photography with a zoom lens will. Also, I feel that prime lenses make more sense if you're shooting somewhere between 24mm to 70mm. In that broad focal range, prime lenses to me make more sense. If you're shooting longer focal lengths, I think zoom lenses do make more sense in the focal range from like 70 to 200, for example. I find tight focal length primes like the 135 f2, for example, although it's a beautiful lens, is quite limiting. So I would suggest using primes in the wider focal lengths. It's just, again, my own opinion. This is largely subjective, and every photographer will have to decide for himself or herself or their self what they want to use. But I prefer using primes in the wider focal lengths from roughly 24 to 70. So what are the lenses that I have chosen to include in my kit? The main lenses that I own are the 24, 35, 50, and 70 to 200. I prefer shooting with primes, so I shoot with primes most often, but I do love my 70 to 200. So that's what I've chosen to work with, and it works pretty great for me. I know I can't possibly touch on everything in this video, but I hope that it has been helpful to hear some of my opinions, to see some of my example images. So do you shoot primes or do you shoot zooms? And why do you shoot one or the other? Do you shoot both like me? Please leave me any questions you have in the comments and I will answer them. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you're new here, consider subscribing. I'd love to see you at the next video. Thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Love is free.